Now joined by the insiders, Chris Johnston and Pierre LeBrun. Gentlemen, for the first time in a decade, the Leafs have a training camp without Mitch Marner in the mix. Brad Treliving says they're ready to turn the page. Pierre, what's your sense of how they are doing that?
Well, let's start with the mood in that room today as they met the media. To me, it's unmistakable how light the mood was compared to the past decade. We're talking about the Shanahan plan no longer here. Brendan Shanahan obviously let go as team president. Always talk of the disappointing playoff performances on this day. How do they turn the page? How do they get better? Player contracts, Marner, that hung over the entire room the entire year last year. A few years ago, Kyle Dubas entering the final year of his deal. We did a chat about that. Then Sheldon Keefe, lame duck coach. It's always been a situation where you felt like people had their hair on fire on this day and that the story just fed from there. Not the case today. Sink or swim, this is more than ever Brad Treliving and Craig Berube's team. There's a calmness around this team right now. Doesn't mean they're going to figure it out like the previous administration, but it certainly feels calmer right now.
Well, and look, they haven't yet replaced Marner, in my view. I mean, they're feeling good about their offseason. They bring in a Matthias Michelli, who might end up getting a look on that top line. Maybe Max Domi's back up there. But, you know, Brad Treliving also acknowledged they still like another top six forward. And to me, this is going to be an undercurrent of this season. They're not alone among NHL teams in looking to bolster pretty high up their lineup within the year. The Leafs this season actually have cap space, which is not something we've been able to say in the past. But what they don't really have is a market that has a lot of fruit on it right now. And I know there are a number of teams league-wide that expect maybe a month into the season, 2 months into the season, some of the teams that were trying to be good this season, you know, get off to bad starts. Maybe there's some trades to be made. So, you know, this is also going to be a work in progress. And I think, you know, a huge to-do item still on the team's list is, you know, you're not replacing Mitch Marner, but maybe getting a little bit more high-end talent into this lineup eventually.
Yeah, Treliving not shy about his desire to add, said it's not from a lack of trying. The Marner question hung over the Leafs last season, and I'm sure in Edmonton they're wondering how long the Connor McDavid question is going to be out there hanging. And Pierre, you actually had a McDavid kind of question for Brad Treliving today.
Well, I didn't mention Connor McDavid by name, Mark. I mean, I don't want to get tampering charges thrown at me by a league. I'm just kidding. But no, listen, we had a little fun with that question, but let's be real about it, too. There isn't a day that goes by that the Maple Leafs front office isn't internally wondering, geez, I wonder what's happening with Connor McDavid and the Oilers, just like 15 other teams around the NHL. Of course, that's the biggest story in the league. Both CJ and I wrote about in The Athletic on this day, because until Connor McDavid makes his decision, there are teams that are going to want to know, do we have to keep our powder dry for the summer of 26? The Leafs are among them. And, you know, CJ just mentioned, they finally have cap flexibility after all these years of being hamstrung, and now the cap's finally going up and Marner's cap savings. But I think the tough balance for Brad Treliving, and he talked about this with me in a piece I did in The Athletic a couple of weeks ago, they want to be aggressive in season with some of that, but they also know there might be a play next summer. Now, Treliving mentioned the only party answer to that question, most of those guys usually sign and don't go to market.
I thought it was interesting that in that answer that Treliving gave you, he kind of turned the attention, segued to Anthony Stolarz, because it's not like the Leafs don't have any contract questions out there. Stolarz is eligible to sign an extension. Chris, you followed up on that. What do you make of what Treliving had to say today?
Well, there's a good reason for that, and that's that there's urgency now picking up around the Stolarz situation. And in part, that's because the goaltender doesn't want talks to go into the season. So if there's going to get an extension done, and there's been, you know, many weeks of dialogue here behind the scenes on a possible extension for him, it's got to happen in these next 3 weeks during camp. And so, you know, it sounds like everyone's pretty optimistic this gets somewhere, but Stolarz is a unique goaltender. You look at his pure numbers, he's among the best in the league. But you look at the games played numbers, he's not ever been a true number one starter, obviously in a tandem here with Joseph Woll. And so I think arriving at the exact, you know, contract that satisfies both parties has been a bit of a progression, I'd say. And so this is something that I think we should look for in the coming days, is either they're going to get something done, or maybe everyone steps back and says, okay, let's play out the year and see where we're at. But, you know, it's a big decision for the Leafs. And, you know, this was a year ago at this training camp, we're saying, how's this goaltending going to work? Well, it ended up being one of the better tandems in the league, and the Leafs want to keep it together.
It does feel like an urgent situation. It was funny, you know, Treliving was like, we have nothing to report today. He's like, well, actually, let's see how today goes. So we'll see what happens with Stolarz. He'll be on the ice on Thursday when the Leafs have their first practices of training camp, and that's when we'll hear from Stolarz afterwards, see what he has to say about things. And we don't expect to see Max Domi out there. He tweaked a lower body issue in the informal skates leading up to camp, so unlikely to be a full participant to start.